Hello and welcome to our series of business interviews. Today the interview is going to be conducted by Jonathan Slobum, who is a long-time associate of To The Point Marketing.
Today I've got a very interesting guest with me. I've got Peter Murley. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you.
So let's get straight into it, Peter. Tell the listeners all about your career. Where did it start, most importantly?
Okay, my career started with a company in the West Country, a company called Westinghouse Brake and Signal, that supplied all the kit for London Transport, London Underground and British Rail. They were sort of associated with the American company, but only in part. We employed about 5,000 people, and I ended up doing a business administration apprenticeship, which took me into HR. Wasn't my chosen career. My chosen career was to be an actor.
Wow.
To be an actor was meant for me to go down to a drama college in Dartington in Devon. I did my interview down there, my audition, and it turned out that I was offered a post there to teach drama to other people, which I didn't want to do. I felt that it was going to be very challenging for me to teach other people to go on stage and be famous when it was me that should be on stage and be famous. I also applied to Bristol Old Vic and various other people and got an offer of an audition there. But when I saw the list of things that I would need at the Bristol Old Vic, including 10 pairs of black tights, wasn't particularly appealing. So I ended up in industry doing something that I thought would be good fun at the time. They were the only employer in the town that I lived in. They employed 5,500 people. I did an apprenticeship for 3 years, did my Chartered Institute exams there, did my...
Chartered Institute of what?
Personnel Development.
Personnel Development.
So I'm now a fellow of that institute. I also did my Ordinary National Certificate for Business Studies, did the first year of the Diploma of Management at Bristol Polytechnic, but then came out and went permanently into an HR role.
Right.
And worked up over 13 years with that company to the point that I became company personnel manager at 27. So very fortunate. Yeah, very fortunate as well. There's a lot of luck involved, not just how good you might or might not be. Decided after 13 years at the company, which was being sold to Hawksford Siddeley and was being broken up into different organisational units, that I didn't want to be personnel manager for just one of those, where before I'd been of all of them. So I made a very big decision, having been married only for about 2 years, and left the company and went self-employed and travelled up to London on the train every day and worked for a company called Computer Sciences Corporation, which is now a very big organisation.
A consultant, in effect.
I was self-employed when I was 28.
Massively ahead of your time, because consultancy really was not particularly popular back in those days.
Right. That was from
maybe frowned upon.
1979. That was yes.
Yeah.
So it was a difficult time, and I was on 100 quid a day, which was pretty good money in those days. Travelled up to London every day, and effectively Computer Science Corporation, which I think is about 10,000 strong in the UK now, was 30 people, and my role was as HR manager to build their business up to about 100, and also to help them get into Switzerland. So I went over to Switzerland and helped them open their Swiss office as well.
Right.
Didn't know what the hell I was doing, but learned very quickly. Came out of that, saw a job advertised for Burroughs, which is now called Unisys. This was in the days when Burroughs was the second largest computer manufacturer in the world behind IBM. And they had UK manufacturing plants, UK sales and marketing divisions selling computers to all sorts of corporate sectors and SMEs. But they also had a program products division which was operated from America, which did software for financial services sector, and they wanted to grow from about 100 people to 200. So I went in there, did that role for a while. HR director of the main company had a heart attack. I offered to step up to the plate and do his job whilst he was off sick.
Yes.
He came back. We mutually agreed that he would retire. I took over as HR director for the UK company.
How old are you now?
32.
So very young still.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't feel it now, but that was true then. Did that for a couple of years, then I joined as associate director of a company called BIS, which is Banking Information Systems. They did banking and insurance systems around the world, and I was their associate director for worldwide HR operations, so had a remit that covered Asia, Americas and the Middle East. So one of the first things I did was a trip around the world to see everybody in all the operating companies, which was good fun.
Great.
Spent quite a bit of time away from the family, which probably led to me doing more of that over the years, I have to say.
That's why you've got a successful marriage.
40 years and still going, yeah. So a very good, interesting role there for a couple of years. Then decided the time had come to join a fully fledged consultancy organisation, PA Management Consultants.
Right.
Did some search consultancy, which I didn't particularly like.
No.
But also we looked at the way in which interim management was coming to bear. So I did a piece of interim work through PA for the Inland Revenue, and also then there was a company called what was it called? EFPOS, Electronic Funds Transfer at Point of Sale.
Yes, I remember that.
Yeah, which was back in 87, 88.
Yes.
So it was set up by all the banks under the auspices of the Bank of England and BACS, and effectively we were there to set a new direct debit card up with all proper encryption. All the operating banks contributed resources. All the consultancy companies in London provided some really good technical resources, and there were about 200 of us. And that sort of started to fade away when it was pretty clear that all the banks were going to put their own debit cards in. But that was a really good entree into the world of consulting, and got a good name in London as well.
Let's just explore the consulting a little bit more. That's a tough gig, going into consulting, especially 20 or so years ago. How did you generate clients?
Clients were
I'm asking the marketing question.
Yeah, clients generated basically by a team effort more than anything else. So in PA for search consultancy, you'd have a couple of researchers. I remember Bernadette was a very interesting lady. She did all the research work for the recruitment consultants, and she'd find your candidates for you. But generally you would have good relationships with most of the big players. It was probably easier in the late 70s, late 80s than it is now, because there was a lot of requirement for search consultancy. And there was also a very strong established psychometric practice, which I did some work with as well. So lots of PA clients had been around for some
So are we
while.
talking about word of mouth marketing here?
Yeah, to a large
Or did
degree.
you actually sit down and write out a strategy about who are my customers, how I'm going to appeal to them, what messages I'm going to put out?
No, it was mainly word of mouth marketing.
And personality.
Yeah, and you would be working for somebody who would have been around in the market longer than you, so you work together, they give you some of their clients and opportunities, and usually they were more. So from that perspective, that worked out very well. And then towards the end of my time with PA, because I did the electronic funds transfer process through PA, a good friend of mine who had worked in FPOS disappeared off suddenly to go back to the Midland Bank. And about 4 or 5 months into the role that he undertook there, gave me a ring and said, "Would you like to join a really exciting project in the city? I can't tell you what the name of the company is. I can't tell you what we're intending to do, but I want you to come on as HR director. Are you prepared to take a risk with me not being able to tell you anything and do this?" And I trusted the guy implicitly, so I left PA. I went back to being self-employed and joined him for what was called Project Raincloud. Now, Project Raincloud, for your listeners, was basically a project that was launched by Midland Bank. Midland Bank had made some pretty challenging investments in places like Crocker Bank in the States and had lost an awful lot of money, but were always up for looking at ways in which they could do something new. And the plan had been hatched by the guy that I knew, Mike Harris, who then went on to other things. The plan had been hatched to put a direct telephone bank in place. So the job
what year are we talking about now?
This was 1989, 1st of January 1989.
So the recession had started to bite then, or was this immediately before that recession?
No, the recession had started to bite.
Because it was an awful recession, wasn't it?
It was pretty bad. There was another one in 2003, 2004, which we maybe talk about a bit later, but it was a difficult time. And the plan was to spend a relatively small sum of money compared to the money that had been lost on the investments in Crocker Bank and set up a direct bank. So they put this strategy to the main board who bought into it. HSBC wasn't on the scene then. That came a little bit later when they acquired Midland. Project Raincloud, effectively's role was to find a premise to work from, to recruit 300 people, to open effectively a direct bank, which became First Direct.
So let's just talk about that a little bit more. That was completely revolutionary. Online banking now is totally accepted.
Yep.
There was no competition in that sector. You are pure innovators.
Pure innovators. The first direct bank in the UK. We're not the first direct bank in Europe. In fact, there were a number in America as well, like Charles Schwab, where we actually visited and looked at how they did things. And call centres were relatively new in those days. The biggest call centres in the UK were BT and British Airways. So First Direct was probably the third biggest call centre behind them. So the idea basically was, in the 9 months from January to October, because we launched on the 1st of October 1989, so we're talking about 26 years old almost to the day, we had to find a premise, build the premise, network it, put the marketing strategy together, all the fulfilment capability, the business processes, the recruitment, the selection, the training, everything.
So you're sitting there
39
as
weeks.
board of directors, who are effectively a group of masterminds with a vision, backed by the Midland Bank, with the responsibility to come back to them in months or years ahead, saying, guys, we've got a successful business on our hands.
And in 39 weeks we launched, and effectively the excitement for me was this was an organisation that said you can do what you like as long as we have this outcome, and they had the balls to let me do effectively what I like. So we introduced psychometric profiling, which 26 years ago was quite something.
Brand new.
We did sort of selection profiling questionnaires. We selected people over the telephone using psychometric profiling techniques. We did structured interview processes, which were brand new. I used some people from PA that I've been associated with in the psychometrics area, and we launched with an awful different proposition than anybody before us. So we didn't take any Midland Bank strategies. We didn't have the Midland Bank mortgage scheme. We didn't operate on the same rules and conditions. We put a whole new employee terms and conditions together. We called it the employment partnership rather than a staff terms and handbook. We had extraordinary low attrition rate for the first couple of years, sub 3% staff attrition rate.
Why? What do you put that down to?
What I put it down to is a really exciting organisation that had a culture that was driven by involving people and getting them to help you with the things you wanted to do, making them feel that they could actually make a big difference to what was going on.
This culture, was this something you just held in your head, or did you actually commit it to paper and articulate it to
it's
your
all committed
directors?
To paper. All committed to paper. We had a launch strategy meeting, the first one probably in February or March, a couple of months after I joined, in terms of what we wanted to be, what our vision and our mission was. And it wasn't only commercial, it was largely around culture and the kind of people we wanted. So all the people in the contact centre, the call centre, had never worked in a bank before in their lives. Probably 2 out of 150 had actually worked in a bank. And we trained them in 6 weeks to do all the things that a bank teller would normally take 2 years to do before they were let loose.
And was there a marketing director on the board?
Yes.
Okay. So before this project, and more importantly after this project, how did your view of marketing change?
Well, it was quite substantially, actually. There were 5 founder directors. There was himself as HR, who then became customer service director after about 6 months. So I ran the call centre and the back office as well. There was an operations director who was a Midland Bank guy that I still keep in touch with now. There was a marketing director who had a lot of background in the banking sector. And there was a IT guy who was relatively young. He was slightly younger than me. I was 38 and he was 35. Then there was Mike Harris, who was the CEO. We were the 5 people on the board, and 2 of us were consultants rather than full-time employees, even though we were actually on the board of directors. The thing about marketing was I was never a great believer in marketing up until that point. I thought it was just a bunch of people who put a few TV adverts together. And we did some really interesting TV adverts in First Direct. If you look back 25 years ago, we had a number of groundbreaking things that went on there, and groundbreaking agencies that we associated with. And I thought they were just sort of people that thought up all these great ideas, had a great time, went out for expensive lunches, but not that at all. Very planned, very much about product, very much about brand. A lot of effort and work went into why we called it First Direct, why it was a black and white marketing logo, when we used colour, why colour was bold, how important it was to have lowercase First Direct, how important it was to be consistent and get the message across to people all the time as to what it was we were trying to do. And that message, to be honest, 26 years later is still almost exactly the same message.
It is, yes.
They hold on to their clients, they get great customer satisfaction ratings, they have great staff loyalty, attrition rates are low. It's still an incredible place, although obviously it's much more internet banking focused now because of the way the technology's changed than it was in 1989.
Yes.
So I did that for 2 years, very, very proud to. First Direct was a absolute pinnacle for me of achievement. It was great fun. Downside was I spent a long time away from the family, be working most weekends, particularly when I was responsible for the call centre as well.
Yeah.
Learned a lot of new things, always learned in my career. Never ever know everything at all. Learned about call centres, customer service. And at the time when all the mobile companies were really starting to come into their own, so as soon as the First Direct gig finished, which was 2.5 years in, 1991, when I came out as a self-employed guy, earning a pretty good day rate at that time, there was great demand for people like me in the mobile market. So I went in to do some work for Cellnet, or O2 as it is now, and they were just a network provider but wanted to get into the provision of service delivery rather than just using the service provider route. So I did about 1.5 years work with O2, helped them outsource some work into an operation at Leeds, which is now Capita. Did lots of work with the TV, cable TV people like Videotron. I was part of the...
When you say work, this is still predominantly around
work.
HR?
No, it's predominantly around customer service now. So
right.
if you step away from First Direct, which was HR morphing into service delivery, service delivery was now the main sort of tool, if you like, in my consultancy armoury. But they've got so much synergy together because you can't deliver service, particularly over the telephone, unless you've got the right people with the right training, with the right culture, the right attitude. So it was all a very sort of very, very logical fit, I felt. And we were in great demand. Lots of people in First Direct. I mean, I went to Australia and did some speeches in Australia based off the back of what we'd done in First Direct, and they were very, very exciting times. Big internet-based opportunities coming up in the 90s. It was a really, really exciting period to be involved with. So really good fun.
It's really interesting. Quite a lot of our listeners are actually own consultancies. Some of them are one-man bands, but some of them are small consultancy practices. If you could give a consultancy practice one piece of advice about being successful, what would it be?
Be yourself. I think one of the things that I've found over the years, which is maybe a little harder to do nowadays, is that if you believe in what you do and how you do it, and you feel you've got the knowledge and the experience, then you need to stick to your guns. So try not to be compromised, because I think that's a route to disaster. And the one big thing that independent consultants can do over and above the big four consultancies particularly is that truth and honesty, and also to know when your time has come. It would be true to say, in my view anyway, that the big consultancies tend to hang on in there well beyond a sell-by date. And the objective is clearly, and I understand this, to put more and more resources in to get more and more revenue and for a client to become more self-reliant on you. That isn't really the objective of a really good consultant, particularly independent consultants, to give them the tools to do the job themselves, to show them how they can operate. They don't need you forever. You need to move on. They need to get experience. You need to help them in that journey. Being yourself, doing what you really believe in, having integrity is really key.
Now I'm going to flip the question on its head, because you've sat on the other side of the fence and you've employed consultants. So what would you look for when employing a consultant? Because there's so many people out there offering consultancy services and making big promises.
Integrity, a delivery record as well. So I want to know that they've done what they say that they have done in practical roll your sleeves up terms. Big consultancies have a tendency to employ people straight from university, which is good, so you get great bright young things. They work them quite hard. They tend to put them in to do jobs which they charge a relatively large sum of money, but the problem is that sometimes these people don't have real practical experience of life. So one of the things I look for in a consultancy, if I'm employing them for my companies I have in the past, is have you got that experience of life? Are you really an organisation with individuals who believe in what they're doing? And tell me when I don't need to do that, or tell me where I'm going wrong. I need honesty and openness. And I expect to give that to my staff, so why shouldn't I expect it from my consultants?
Great advice. So let's get back to how your career progressed. So you were out there doing consultancy, doing very, very well. What next?
More of the same, and then I did a piece of work as a consultant for two companies. One was the Royal Automobile Club in Bristol, and the second one was United Artists in Bristol, which subsequently became Telewest, which subsequently was acquired by Virgin Media. And I did an audit, an operational audit, which was basically, is your business from a service delivery perspective working? Is your culture operating properly? What are the things you're doing that other organisations do better? Is your technology right? Have you got your forecasting model done? What's your customer complaints like? How many acquisitions are you making? All the things, almost soup to nuts type stuff. And I did the piece of work for Telewest in Bristol, and the outcome of the audit was probably the most disparaging operational review I have ever done anywhere. And as a result, I was asked to put my money where my mouth was by the CEO, and he asked me if I would join on a permanent basis as VP Customer Service. So I was then responsible from a head office perspective for 7 franchises with about 1,100 customer service staff. I also made it very clear what I thought about the systems, which at the time were not particularly well coordinated. CRM was generally provided by help desk companies rather than CRM organisations, which is the case nowadays. So I got given the task of taking on IT and software as well, another 90 people, then to the States to find the best potential billing solutions and CRM systems, and did a lot of work on customer satisfaction outcomes as well. So had a really, really good 2 years at Telewest. Decided at the end that really going into consultancy was still something I felt I could make a big difference. So 1999 I left, having written a book on customer services, which was published by Gower, which is now, 16 years ago.
What's the name of the book?
Handbook of Customer Service.
Is it still available?
It's still available. It's expensive. It's more of a textbook than anything else.
On Amazon?
But I did it on Amazon, but I think it's the 1,246,321st most popular book ever on Amazon, so you can see how many that sold. But it was good fun doing it. And I formed another company with a business partner, and we did much of the same thing, but this was lots of new startups. So we went into Germany and did a new startup mobile company. We ended up in Holland, doing stuff for a mobile company. We did some work for a couple of cable TV operators. Excuse me, I did some work for Saudi Arabia Airlines, which was really fascinating, and formed a really, 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 really good business. And that worked right the way through to 2003. I then developed cancer, stepped away from the business, took my chair out, was off for about 6 months, and on the day I started my chemotherapy, I was asked if I wanted to do a project with Vodafone. So, having left the business I formed and leaving my business partners to get on with it, I took the job in Vodafone, which was program director for a change management program, which was looking at all their 3 streams of operation and how they could more personalise the contact strategy. It was called end-to-end service delivery, And we did that for about 15 months and effectively formed a brand new, very, very small call centre with some very specific SMEs that we took from the market, plus a few corporate customers, and offered them an entirely different level of service where One Stop generally did it all. Because in most mobile companies, if you want to speak to the network won't speak to you because they're technical and they don't do service delivery. So we brought all the systems onto the desktop and gave access to all the mobile phones that were in the marketplace to everybody in the call centre, so they could diagnose and report and repair any mobile item that you wanted.
It's good.
So did that for 18 months. One of the people that was working with me through my company then, we decided there was a big market in social housing. So we started to offer service delivery in call centres, predominantly in social housing. Did a lot of strategy work for them. He's still doing that as it happens. Carried on with the sort of more commercial side of private sector business as well. But life got a bit difficult, 2003, 2004, bit of an economic sort of hiccup as well. It wasn't that easy. The market was quite challenging. And I think from memory around 2008 I was contacted by a big company that are now part of Towers Perrin, who are the big pensions consultants. Watson Wyatt, they're now Watson Towers or Watson Perrin, whatever. And this was to do a job in Russia, in Moscow. Working for the biggest insurance company in Moscow, and trying to put in place a internet-based contact centre. So using the philosophy of First Direct, which they got to know, and there were 4 of us that went over and did that work. 2 from Watson's at the time, and myself and the ex-marketing director at First Direct, and we teamed up together to produce the strategy, the business plan, the modelling, the call centre. I took responsibility for the customer service, the modelling, and the IT operations, helped them with CRM strategies.
Very good.
We did that for about 18 months, 2 years. Spent a lot of time in Moscow, loved every minute of it.
Crikey.
Came back, went off to Dubai for 6 months to do a strategy for one of the big mobile providers in Dubai to outsource their service operation to India and Egypt. And ended up managing that outsourced operation for about 6 months until a permanent person came in. Came back into the UK, sat back and thought, this is a very difficult market, it's quite challenging, where's my next assignment going to come from? And I got a call from a private equity company who were doing a reference on one of my friends that I met in Vodafone, who was a mergers and acquisitions specialist and was being appointed or approached to be appointed as an interim CEO for a wealth management company in Jersey. He put me forward as a referee. I did the reference. He unfortunately didn't get the role, and I was rung up by the private equity house a couple of days later and said, would you like to be CEO of a wealth management company? And I said, well, 2 problems there is I don't understand what a wealth management company does. I've never worked in the sector. And number 2, I don't particularly like Jersey because I've had a disastrous holiday many years ago. 3 months later, I was there as CEO and stayed there for 4 years and retired last year.
Fantastic. And what did you achieve along the way? Just give us a scope of what
have I achieved generally?
No, in 4 years. The wealth
in the 4 years, we doubled the revenue of the business. We increased the EBITDA profit by 11 percentage points.
And how did you do that? What are the points?
The market was very challenging in that organic growth was a little difficult because of the way the economy was at that point. I did 5 acquisitions effectively, so 1 in Switzerland, 2 in Jersey, 1 in the Middle East, and the last one was in Singapore. So most of the incremental revenue came from those acquisitions. And the approach was relatively simple. I was there because they wanted me for my background and skills in operations and transformation and business turnaround. So effectively it was changing the culture, doing it for similar price, so same number of people for a business that was a little larger, expanding the business from not just private clients but to corporate clients, and turning around systems, processes, people, and brand.
This is really interesting. So I think you're the first guest we've had on who's got first-hand experience of mergers and acquisitions. What would you say is the number one pitfall that companies fall into when actually doing acquisitions?
Not understanding the culture of the organisation they're acquiring enough.
Yeah.
And the most important part of an acquisition is the integration into the main business. The part of negotiating what it is you're buying and how much you should pay for it, and the due diligence on the files and the finances is hard,
yes,
and long, but it's the easy bit compared with integrating people. People are what makes a business. People is what gives you competitive advantage. No less so in the business that I was in Jersey, which is all about people. This is about private clients who have personal relationships with teams and groups of individuals. And if you don't get that right, if you don't provide the service on that personal level, if you're not consistent and you can't make that work in an acquisition, and it becomes very challenging.
So summarise for us how you would get that right.
Well, the way I did it was basically to have an internal team that we put onto the case for integration as soon as the acquisition had been identified. So the first thing is, when you identify your targets for acquisition, is to have some similarities, if you like, between the management style and the services and the brand and the ethics behind it and the integrity of the business as well. So if those two things are at complete odds, then it does become a bit challenging, to say the least.
Yes.
But then having that consistent team go in and doing all the work. So once we've made the acquisition or decided that the process is well underway, is what are we going to do about the brand? So having a strategy which is consistent. So we will swap over to this brand name at that date.
Yes.
We will give staff proper induction so they understand what it is to be part of the family that they now belong to.
Yes.
How they can make a difference, what value added they can provide to the business, and that way sort of get them indoctrinated is probably the wrong word, but get them sort of adding value straight away and feeling that people want them, because often with an acquisition they sort of have been hanging around for 5 or 6 months while various people have come through and had a look at them with a sort of a magnifying glass and feel, am I going to keep my job or not? So making it very clear what their roles are as well.
Great advice, Peter. So Peter, let's just change the pace of the interview a little bit now and talk a little bit about you and your career. What along the way, people often take actions in great faith and then they get an unintended outcome. Have you had an instance where you've got an unintended outcome?
Yeah, I guess there'd be one. It's not a marketing outcome, it was a people outcome, because as you have probably guessed today, even though I've ended up as a CEO, fundamentally an HR person and a service person at heart, is that at First Direct we had about 150 people in the call centre, and I made as a team the decision not to appoint any team leaders in the call centre until 3 months after we went live. Big issue, 150 people, 145 people applied for the team leader jobs and there were only 12 jobs. So we ended up with having to manage expectations of the 133 people that didn't get the roles. And that was very difficult. And if I had my time again, I would probably have chosen the team leaders during the training programme, because they certainly, some of them shone out from that process. But managing expectations is a real challenge.
Good. So throughout this interview we've talked about your career. We've given the listeners an impression that it was a nice steady journey of continuous success and growth. We all know that no business and no career is just a nice steady trajectory. What were your setbacks, or what was your biggest setback? And more to the point, how did you overcome it?
I think my setback would be the economy. So there's been at least 2 blips in my consultancy career, which has been some consultancy and some permanent work, where the economy has sort of intervened and started to become a problem. And I guess one of the blips was being fortunate enough in the 80s and the 90s to not have to pick up the phone and cold call and ask for work.
Yes.
Because the work would come to you by reputation, because the mobile market and direct banking were two very small markets, and because you were at the beginning of them, you got well known. But then as life becomes more difficult, you have to learn that it doesn't always come by you sitting back and waiting for the phone to ring. So you have to be more proactive. You have to go out and tell people what you've done and why they need you and what it is you can do for them. So being very clear on what it is you offer.
Yeah.
So I guess good strong marketing messages in a sense is that this is what we stand for, this is what we will deliver, this is how we're going to do it. And I think one of the mistakes is not perhaps doing that quick enough. I think also a mistake in some of the businesses that I've managed or been involved with is not making difficult decisions quick enough. Is holding off. So where there is a need to perhaps get rid of people or close something down or stop a project, the human tendency is, if you've got any emotion about you, is to just be a little cautious. But actually, hindsight being a wonderful thing, I think I would have done things a lot quicker in some cases.
Because it was going to happen anyway.
Yes, and it just delays the inevitable and causes some pain along the way.
Okay. And so you personally, where does your energy come from?
Well, no, that is a good one. I think my energy comes from being a change agent. I'm so passionate about customer service. I'm so passionate about people. I'm so driven about change. I couldn't work in an environment where all I was managing the status quo for 10 years, running a business that was the same old.
Yeah.
Life isn't like that anymore.
No.
But for me, change is which really spurs me on. Personal life, that's true as well, but in business life, change. And it frustrates me where people won't see the necessity for that. But the most important thing is not to dictate how you think they should change, but actually to try to get people to understand why.
I agree.
So leading them to the solution or the answer that you think is right, but getting to the point where they believe strongly, and in fact where they have been very much a part of that journey, because people's real belief comes from them feeling they've had a big say in what they do.
So true. We try to do that at Peppered Moth, as you know.
Yeah.
And get the directors all aligned around marketing strategy.
Yeah. All got to sing from the same hymn sheet.
We have a few tricks up our sleeve for getting that sorted out. So look, we're coming towards the end, and the two closing questions, they're always the same. The first is, what is your favourite business book? And the second is, as a gesture of thanks, we'd like to make a small donation to your favourite charity. So what is that charity and why?
Okay, charity is a difficult one. It would be one of two: cancer, because of the fact that I had cancer in 2003. And
is there a particular cancer charity?
It would be no. It would be just the cancer
research.
The cancer research,
UK.
Probably.
Yep.
Yeah, mine was colon cancer, but
right.
It's a relatively easy issue now. But in 2003, the results were sort of less certain.
Yes.
So there would be that one, and the second one would probably be arthritis, because my daughter has arthritis. She's 36, suffers from it in her hands quite badly.
Yes.
Never ever complains about it at all. They do some great work, and there's a lot more they can do with a little bit more money, and it's something that definitely is soluble, and is a real difficult thing to live with, particularly when you're young.
Yeah, definitely. Well, we'll make sure that happens.
Okay.
And your business book?
The most recent one is called Making It Happen, and this is about Fred Goodwin and the man that blew up the economy. I think the title is Making It Happen.
Who's the author?
The men who blew up the economy. Ian Martin.
Okay.
And the reason I like it is that it describes, and again, hindsight's a wonderful thing, a sort of a megalomaniac businessman, which is clearly what Fred Goodwin is depicted as in the world around us.
Yes.
But in this book, it comes out in spades. And a megalomaniac who had the management style of a dinosaur as well. And if you read it, I think you'll find quite quickly all the things that went wrong in the bank, and all the signs that were there, and all the things that he should have done but didn't, and the way that he, as an autocrat, ran the business. And you can't be an autocrat in a business now.
No.
It doesn't work like that at all. You have to be much more inclusive.
Yes.
He didn't have the right charisma. He was power hungry. It's a really interesting read and a lesson as to how not to do things.
Brilliant. That's the first time that one's come up in the interviews. So finally, how can listeners get in contact with you?
Well, they can go on to my website, which is innobridge.co.uk.
How do you spell that?
INNOBRIDGE, innobridge.co.uk.
Yep.
Or my mobile number is 079 6655 4411.
Fantastic. Peter Murley, thank you very much. You've been a fantastic guest.
Thank you.